Hello and welcome to the Ideas Pod. In this session, we are going to be discussing about a region that's been the driver of global growth for a long period of time. Talking about Southeast Asia, countries like Philippines, Thailand, and Singapore. Now, these countries are formerly known as the ASEAN countries, and they have a particular way of doing diplomacy as well as engaging with the rest of the world. But how does that engagement change in this increasingly polarized world? You've got the Americans on one side, the Chinese, the Russians. So what does that mean for the ASEAN way of doing things in this world? And that's what we're going to be discussing in this session. Let me introduce the guests first. Joining me is Enrique Manalo, who's the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, and Mr. Sangiampongsa, who's the Foreign Minister of Thailand. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the Ideas Pod. Let me first, just to set things up, ask you this. What is the ASEAN way of doing diplomacy and engaging with the world? How would you describe it, Minister?
Well, I think the ASEAN way is through cooperation with all countries and those who wish to cooperate with ASEAN. We have also the ASEAN way in the sense of reaching decisions by consensus. But I think most importantly, the ASEAN way is to try and bring together all the parties in our region, not only the ASEAN members, but the other countries who are not members of ASEAN. And that's through the concept of ASEAN centrality. Especially through the institutions of ASEAN, where we have a number of institutions such as the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, where ASEAN, as chair, convenes meetings and invites all the major countries in our region, including those outside of our region, the EU, the United States. And these are the forums where they all meet to discuss issues of regional and even global import. So that way, the ASEAN is a kind of convener and facilitator, as well as an institution aimed at, or a grouping aimed at improving the lives of its members too, through economic, social, and political measures.
There's a very important word you mentioned right now, which is consensus. That seems to be very hard in the world right now. The major powers can't agree on anything. So how do you project that ASEAN way of consensus into this polarized world, Minister?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to understand the histories of ASEAN. In fact, ASEAN have gone through all of these problems during the times when we established our ASEAN 58 years ago during the Cold War periods. And, we established a very good collaborations, as Manalo said. The concept is that we try to avoid the taking side. That is one way. And the ASEAN ways that you mentioned, it's difficult to make a consensus, is we have the concept. If you look at the countries in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, we are the only regional grouping that's composed of several, and in fact, it's different in political ideologies. We have capitalists, we have socialists, and then we have absolute monarchy. So we experience all of these things, even though we are different. We don't want everyone to look the same, act the same, and think the same. I like to say it in every occasion that we are the very special countries, member countries, that can see the beauty of differences. And that becomes understanding that instead of trying to push someone to act, to think, to work, to talk the same, we try to highlight some things, which is the differences that we have. But if you look at the histories of ASEAN become, the strength of ASEAN is because we are different. And so to achieve the consensus is not difficult and not easy. I think if we understand each other, if we understand the situations, if we understand the history backgrounds, that we are different, then the achievement of the consensus might not be a problem.
Yeah. And something that the world is struggling right now with is taking sides. We've always said that if countries do not take sides as much, maybe it would be a better place right now. But then again, you look at the sort of wars in the world right now, you look at people being killed, and then it becomes a moral question as well. You as a country have a responsibility to take the side of the good. At the same time, you want global peace at the end of the day. So how do you balance those two, let's say, opposing forces?
Well, I think what really the ASEAN way of dealing that is first to focus on ASEAN's own objectives. How to improve the lives of our people, how to strengthen the ASEAN community, and how to enhance integration among the ASEAN member states. But I think the bigger picture here is that the ASEAN countries, who are essentially middle power countries in our region. I think we have realized that we should be the makers of our own destiny, and that we shouldn't let the future of our region be determined by one side or a big power or the big powers. We have a duty to ourselves and our people to ensure that we also have a say in how our region develops. And that's how we move forward. We have our own identity, and we deal with the powers in that way by asserting the ASEAN view as much as possible. Because we are in this region, we will be here forever probably, and so
Yes.
it's really our duty as let's say government officials and as policymakers to ensure that our countries are developed enough to really have a future say, or a say even now in the present, on how our region develops, the ASEAN region, even the wider Indo-Pacific region, and eventually even on global issues of concern to us, such as climate change, health security, etc. So we are doing our way by trying to assert to the best of our ability our voice in regional and global affairs.
If I may add,
Yeah, please do.
when you said that once there are difficulties or confrontations between, don't want to say anyone, but if you have a kind of confrontations, then the way of the ASEAN that we act together is a constructive dialogue. The dialogue is the only way to solve the problem, because if you have a confrontations and then you try to take sides and then try to accumulate, the support of, a lot of countries in the areas of arms, and there will be, no ways that you can find a solution. So constructive dialogue is the most important things, and that becomes the principle of ASEAN. If you may be well aware, we have around 1,000 meetings among ASEAN members, but that is the way that ASEAN is doing things together, constructive dialogue.
And when you try to convince your colleagues in maybe China or in the West that consensus building is the way to go, what sort of response do you usually get from them, Minister?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to realize that ASEAN's main strength, at least with the other countries in the region, is our power of convening meetings and also facilitating the meetings. I said earlier that, for example, our institutions like the East Asia Summit attracts almost every country in the region, even extra-regional countries. And the issues we discuss are issues of concern to all of us. And the idea is to try and bring the dialogue together. So we don't really think that we'll be able to solve the problems at those meetings. But the thing is for countries to exchange their views so we develop a better understanding. We'll build on that in the future, because our aim is really to promote dialogue and try and see we can facilitate the meeting of minds. And that's where the power of ASEAN lies, in the sense that we're the only institution that has the ability to attract the participation of major powers and even the middle powers in our region, and as I said, even outside the region, from EU, from Western countries as well, plus our own dialogue partners. We have many mechanisms of dealing with other countries too. So that's where, that's our role, to see how we can have the dialogue.
And when Secretary Manalo mentions about the East Asia Summit, ASEAN also established several mechanisms, things like ASEAN Regional Forum is one of the most effective forums. And it is the only international forums where North Korea sits at the same table with all stakeholders like South Korea, US, Japan, and the United States. So the constructive dialogue, if we select the issues or the themes, the agenda according to our needs, try to solve it, or try to make a durable solutions, then we can, get something. I fully agree that we cannot solve 100% all the problems, but this is the efforts, and it is the way that ASEAN is practiced for the long period of time. And it works for ASEAN, might as well work for any other regions.
Well, I could just add to that. For example, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, we now have over 50 countries who have acceded, especially in recent years, quite a number. So I think many countries, even from other regions, are seeing the value of ASEAN and working with ASEAN to promote greater cooperation and dialogue. So I think that's, to me, an excellent sign of the growing relevance, in fact, of ASEAN and recognition of the contributions we can make towards peace and stability, as well as economic development and growth.
Right. I'd also like to focus a bit on where the Southeast Asian region is placed, because economically, a lot of countries in the region are dependent on China for trade. Most of your countries, China is the biggest trading partner. But then historically, you look at the security part of things, and the US has provided weapons and security guarantees and things like that. So how do you bring the ASEAN way into a situation where you have a belligerent neighbor who you're also financially dependent on, and then a distant power who's been your security guarantor, but is now rolling back those commitments under Donald Trump? You can go ahead, sir.
Well, I would like to highlight the way that ASEAN and the histories of ASEAN as we go out together. You know, when the establishment of ASEAN, if you look at the histories of ASEAN's established on the political motivations, means that the politicals and security is the incentive for ASEAN's 5 founding member countries, including Philippines and Thailand, which came into the tables and then established ASEAN. But once we understand that in this real world, the economic development is much more important, so we change the mindsets of securities into the collaborations in economic development, and we divert the ideas of changing the battlefield into a marketplace, and then that's what ASEAN becomes the major trading partner, not only China. Of course, China is very important for ASEAN, and in fact, China is important to every country in this world. So right now, member of ASEAN become the major trading partner and investor for each and every one of ASEAN. So that is very proud of ASEAN. Of course, we depend also the economic developments with China, but a lot more that we are doing together among ASEAN is one of the enormous achievements that we have made. And the security, ASEAN's also working together in that areas. Now, ASEAN becomes more and more collaborate in the areas of securities and everything together. And if you take the clip from Mr. He's the former permanent secretary of Singapore. He said that if you want to learn how to live in peace, you come to ASEAN and then you learn from us.
Mr. Manalo, I think you'll be better placed to answer this because we're seeing headlines almost every day now about clashes between the Chinese and the Philippines in the open seas. And how is Philippines balancing those economic relations with China? And then you obviously are a treaty ally of the United States. How does that work out?
Well, as we have said on many occasions, of course, we have extensive relations with China, especially on the economic front, and of course with the United States also as a treaty ally. And we are dealing with both of them in a way that we try and enhance our interests. Of course, we have tensions in the South China Sea. And those are tensions, I think, which have been there, especially recently, and has led to a number of incidents. But we have always been committed to dealing with these tensions or incidents through management, through diplomatic or peaceful means, and we're still committed to that. And of course, we are doing everything in our ability to ensure that we try and follow this track. But of course, we've made perfectly clear that while we're committed to peaceful or diplomatic solutions, it would not be at the expense of our interests as far as the South China Sea is concerned. With the United States, of course, we have a treaty, and we've had strong historical relations with them, either on the economic or the security front. And at the moment, it's from our conversations with U.S. officials, I think I can only say that we have a great optimism that this relationship will continue. That being said, of course, we're also committed to discussing with China on how we can manage the tensions in the South China Sea. So those are the approaches. But at the same time, we're also dealing with other partners.
Just to follow up on that,
yeah.
When President Donald Trump goes out in the Oval Office and says, you know what, if NATO countries don't pay up, we're not going to defend you. What goes on in the mind of officials in Manila? What is your reaction to statements like that?
Well, I can only say our reactions to what we have discussed with U.S. officials in the current administration. And I can say at this point that it gives great hope and optimism that our relationship will not only remain stable, but could increase in the future.
Mr. Let's also talk about those middle powers, your likes of India, for example. What role does ASEAN see for countries like India when it comes to bridging those polarized divisions in the world? How can ASEAN combine with India to create consensus in the world?
Well, I think the most important is that India is also our dialogue partner of ASEAN, and several things that we can do with India. In fact, in this, the geopolitics is not just the issues of politics and security, but there's also the opportunities for geoeconomics as well. So I think the ASEAN way, we look for something very constructive, not just conflict. And working with India is very important because ASEAN and India can collaborate in several areas. And look at ASEAN. In fact, we are the center of connectivity for India and countries in South Asia to connect with ASEAN and ASEAN Plus. When I said ASEAN Plus, is plus China, Japan, and Korea. And through the hub of connectivities and the principle of being peacefully together, I think ASEAN and India can make a lot more for progressing the prosperities in the regions of South Asia and Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia plus China and Japan and Korea.
Would you like to add to that?
Yes, I could. Well, first of all, the Philippines is now the ASEAN-India coordinator. And we already have a lot on our plate. We have a lot of activities being planned. We'll be for the next 3 years during our coordinatorship, because India is definitely a very valuable partner for individual ASEAN countries as well as ASEAN as a whole. And I think if you look at the broader picture, the India's Indo-Pacific strategy, which is now gaining much greater shape and participation of India, especially in our region, and the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, a document we adopted some years ago, practically coincide, especially on the main values that we have is of ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific, ensuring greater prosperity for our peoples. So I think, and of course, commitments to international law and a rules-based order. So I think these basic values provide the basis for really a strong relationship, whether it be on the economic front or cultural front. So India is obviously a very important partner for ASEAN as well as the individual ASEAN countries.
I'd also like to bring your focus on something that the ASEAN way has not managed to solve so far, and that's the situation in Myanmar. It's been, I think, more than almost 5 years now, and the military junta still maintains a grip on power, and the transition to democracy is not happening. And now there's a civil war and fighting every day between the junta as well as the rebel forces. What is the ASEAN way forward in Myanmar?
Well, when you mentioned about the civil wars going on, in fact, there's no civil war in Myanmar. And of course, situations in Myanmar is very important for ASEAN. And what we are trying to do, particularly Thailand as the immediate neighbor of Myanmar, what we are trying to do, the best is now trying to change the mindsets of the people. First of all, you have to understand the situations, the histories of Myanmar. And, it is the internal, difficulties that they have. We don't want to interfere into, the directions of the countries of Myanmar. We have one of the principles of ASEAN is the non-interference, which still, works. And we want Myanmar to solve its own problems. It must be Myanmar-led, Myanmar-owned. And 5-point consensus of ASEAN still remains the same as the principle of doing things together in Myanmar. But on top of that, we are trying to change the mindsets of the people, any stakeholders who are part of the difficulties. We would like to change the mindsets of all of them from the sense of conflicts into collaborations. In fact, the fighting against the call center or scammer is a very good collaborations between Thailand and the neighboring country. ASEAN support Thailand's doing that, and have to thank to India because at that time I organized the 3-party meetings last May, if I'm not mistaken, here in New Delhi when India hosts the BIMSTEC retreat, and then we organized the 3-party meetings, Thailand, Myanmar, and India. to change the mindset to try to focus on collaborations, and it yields a very good result. At the end of last month, we can solve problems of scammer and also the call center, and 500 India they are flying back home safely. Well, there's a lot more that we still working together, and that is to show to you that the collaborations between Thailand, Myanmar, and all stakeholders of Myanmar in this particular issue working very well.
Just on that point of non-interference in a fellow ASEAN state, we have seen reports of alleged American weapons flowing into Myanmar. We've heard about the Chinese involvement in Myanmar. So we've even seen the junta chief visiting Moscow and talking to President Putin and all of that. So when you see all these other major players heavily involved in Myanmar, how does ASEAN manage to still stick to the policy of non-interference? Is there a tendency somewhere to sort of say, if they're interfering, shouldn't we protect our interests as well? Mr.
Well, first let me say that the basic framework of ASEAN's approach to Myanmar is the 5-point consensus, and we still remain committed to that. And that includes a number of elements which are essentially aimed at trying to get the stakeholders to meet and discuss. The second point is humanitarian assistance, where ASEAN has contributed to that. And more or less that has been the situation in the past few years. But we have to recognize that ultimately any solution to the problem in Myanmar has to be Myanmar-led. The people have to do it. What ASEAN can do using the 5-point consensus as a framework is to try and see how we can create conditions for dialogue. No one is saying this can happen overnight. In fact, many countries in ASEAN, especially, for example, my colleague from Thailand, have tried to also arrange through activities to involve some of the stakeholders. And this kind of activities are being encouraged by ASEAN. But I think what we're really trying to impress is that in order to have lasting peace, in order to have stability, the people of Myanmar have to be the ones. Now, to reach any kind of solution, what we can do is to try and encourage them and nudge them forward. We're willing to work even with other countries, provided they're within the context of the 5-point consensus, and ASEAN coordinates with them too, if possible. So that's been our approach. It will continue to be our approach. Also with the UN, we work with them too. So really, this is the kind of situation where you really have to rely on the internal forces to be the eventual solution.
Well, I think strategy and geopolitics aside, I think we can all agree that consensus and taking everyone along is something that every country in the world should be striving to do. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for this interesting chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.